Good evening, good evening, good evening, one and all, and welcome to the Wednesday Live. As always, thank you very much to coming and joining in with us this evening. Like I say, I think we're gonna have a very good time this evening. so, so, um, I had a lot of thought about what I wanted to do with this live stream, and to be honest, we're going to be covering Truss from now until, to be honest, whenever she's gone. So we've got plenty of time to talk about Truss. We're probably going to be talking about it maybe for at least the next 2 years. That's maybe how long she decides to stay in. But given the fact that already, even before Truss had taken office, there were backbench MPs talking about who could replace her and how they can get rid of her. She might not be they might not be in the long time, essentially. So yeah, it's going to be interesting. It is going to be interesting to say the least. But instead this evening, I thought we instead watch an interview that Nigel Farage did with the Torygraph or the Telegraph. Call it what you will. But that's what we're going to do, I think, this evening. If you are, however, a member of the Pony Club, I did do a video today about Liz Truss's first PMQs. So if you haven't seen that video yet, or if you are a member of the Patreon, that is now up for you guys to watch. If you would like to join the Pony Club and see the rest, not only that membership video, but the rest that we have made, like I say, join the Pony Club, join the Patreon. Like I say, links are down below. Other than that, shall we strap yourselves in? Strap yourselves in. But before we do that, let's greet everyone in chat, shall we? Ollie Taro, morning to you. Colin Thompson, greetings to you from New York. The Fickle Punny, hello to you. Alex Chapman, hello to you. The Lefty Boater, hello to you. Guardian Dusha? I don't know how that's how you say it. Good evening to you, Gurjan. Hopefully that's how you say it. Dave W, evening to you. Monster Movie Fan, good evening to you. Dave Walker, hello to you. Game Joram, hello to you. Robin Halpin, hello to you. Dave W, hello to you. Alex Sherman, hello to you. 91 Leads, hello to you. Chatty Rat, good evening. Mithril, good evening to you. And Smith, good evening to you. And Icarus, yeah. Please don't let Truss be around for 2 years. Well, to be honest, I don't think she's going to last the winter. I think tomorrow you're going to get that energy announcement, and I think things could go very badly from there. This energy policy that she wants to put forward and not even have MPs discuss, by the way, this is being put forward tomorrow and there is going to be no discussion. So you know this is going to be bad. When even the government do not want to talk about this great idea they've got, which is going to help us out during this, cost of living crisis. Yeah, sets a wonderful, wonderful example of the future to come. But Pretty Bird, greetings to you as well. Robin, hello to you. And Chris, hello to you as well. hope the letters are going in already. I still think it's too soon yet. Too soon for that, but we'll see. We'll see. You never know with this Tory party at the moment. You can really tell. So let's dive into this, because apparently in this interview, Nigel is a bit upset by what the Tories have done to Britain. Why on earth would Nigel Farage be upset by essentially the Tories doing everything that the Tories, that he wanted the Tories to do. How can Nigel Farage be disappointed? So I suppose we'll find out. Rob, yeah, this was a nightmare interview. I've heard that it was a bit of a cringe fest, but I think it's worth getting into. I really think it's worth getting into. So let's dive into this.
I think right now they're headed for a 97 cell wipeout. I really, really do. And frankly, they deserve it.
Hello and welcome to Off Script. My name is Stephen Edgington.
So, as you heard from Farage in that bit of an entrance there, you think the Tories are about to be wiped out. But for what reason? This is, I'll bear in mind, I haven't watched this yet. I've seen highlights, but I haven't watched it all. So I'm not going to spoil it for those who haven't watched it. But what could be the reason with this? Let's find out together, shall we?
As Britain awaits its next Prime Minister, how does one of the most effective contemporary British politicians view the challenges facing the country?
Most effective most effective. What did he describe him as?
Contemporary British politician.
Most effective contemporary British politician. Hard to disagree with, given the fact Nigel's goals of what UKIP was, which was to push the Tories more to the right. Certainly achieved that. And, he, quote, got Brexit in a way. But we'll see.
View the challenges facing the country. Nigel Farage joins me to discuss the most important issues of the day, from mass migration to the energy crisis. Are we witnessing the end of the Conservative Party?
I think so.
Straight before we get into it, straight into it. The biggest issues of the day. When you look at polling, no one cares about immigration. It's interesting that once Nigel Farage left UKIP, strange how people stopped caring about immigration. Because you can see it in the polls, immigration just goes, after 2016, drops. And before 2016, from 2015, because that's when Farage really started barraging people with it. Yeah, you are right. Yeah, mass migration. Yeah, very true. There are not a lot of people in the UK. Plus, you've got to remember, the right wing in this country make no distinction between someone who has entered legally, who might have sort of come in via the EU route, who might have been like Polish, who obviously when we're in the EU would have, migrated over to here and set up their own business and, is doing well. There is no distinction between that and someone who they would say is an illegal immigrant. But the reason why they don't talk about illegal immigration in this country is because it doesn't actually happen quite a lot, at least not in the numbers that they are saying. Even with those migratory crossings, by the way, most of the people that come over in those boats, even in the Home Office's own reports on this, say that all those people that are coming across in boats have legitimate asylum applications. So even then, you know, so this is one of the things you've got to remember when people on the right, especially in the UK, say that. They're not really maybe telling the difference. Yeah, yeah, that's true. Maybe it is time to tell Sargon to stand for the Tories. That would be an incredibly destructive path he has caused. Incredibly destructive if that happens. But I don't even think the Tories would let him stand. He has stood for UKIP, and I think that's against the Tory rules as far as I'm aware. It might not be anymore, but it was at one time. We'll see. Yeah, that's, you see, oh, this is one of the things, you know, Priti Patel left, and Priti Patel was incredibly cruel to people seeking asylum here in the UK. I mean, you saw it in the Rwanda plan, the idea that she wants, like, immigrations officials on jet skis to push the boats back out into, to drag them back out into the channel, to trying to get the Royal Navy to, do exactly the same. And they turned around and refused, which good on them for doing that. And who replaces Priti Patel? Because she left. Let's bear this in mind. Priti Patel left purely because of the fact over the past 3 years in the Johnson administration, Patel was seen as a failure of a Home Office. Of the runner of the Home Office, she was considered to be completely and utterly a failure. And now you've replaced her with Suella Braverman, who is, if not, probably going to be even more harsh than Priti Patel. In fact, that's an interesting statistic I need to tell you about, actually. We all know the ERG have taken over. This was one of the things that was predicted because, Truss is their puppet. In the current government, in not Priti Patel's government, in Liz Truss's government, 88% of ministers are members of the ERG, yet they only make up 11% of Parliament. Remember that. 88% of the government, that's who Liz Truss has brought in, 88% are ERG members. So remember, guys, if they go around and start to complain, well, Brexit wasn't done, this is the true time. This is the time of the ERG, unfortunately. And we are going to see some, as you saw, if you happen to catch PMQs today, you saw Liz Truss turn the Tory wheel towards the right of the party, not just the right of the party. We're talking far right of the party. It's yeah, we are going to see some. We are going to see some interesting figures, and not just interesting figures in the next couple of years, but also some very, very worrying policy. Oh, Cathology, good evening to you. Yep, you are right there, Chatty Rat. That is indeed murder. Is partly why the Royal Navy said, no, thank you very much. We're not doing that. That's why they refused to do it. Yeah. Who in the ERG does research exactly? Exactly. Who does research in the RG? Anyway, let's get on with this. Because, like I say, we've got a lot to talk about. We've got a lot to talk about with this interview. And like I say, we're gonna have plenty of time to talk about Liz Truss in the coming weeks and months.
To the energy crisis. Are we witnessing the end of the Conservative Party?
I think so, yeah. Why would you vote for them? I mean, other than not liking Labour, you know, the classic where first past the post politics has now taken us in this country. We don't vote for who we like. We vote, we dislike them, but we dislike the others even more. It's very odd the way our politics has become. Now, at the last election, Corbyn was a very, very major negative factor. In the 2015 election, there was...
So absolutely no mention about Tory policy there. Tory policy, by the way, which Farage supports. He's talked about the immigration policy that Priti Patel brought in, being the the points-based immigration system that we now have. He said he supported that. I'm pretty sure as well he's for cutting taxes. I'm pretty sure he's said in the past he's for lowering the corporation tax. What current Tory policy could he be really against, you know?
Was, oh my goodness me, the SNP. We can't bear the thought of them being in coalition. So we'll vote Conservative. And you begin to understand as a Conservative voter,
that was never going to happen. That was never going to happen. Right. The SNP have never had, I think, more than, is it 11 MPs I think they've got in Parliament? They've never had, I think, more than that. And even prior to like 2015, there was no way that the Tory party would ever join with the SNP. So that's just a complete fantasy, you know.
They simply lie to you at every election. I know in sort of Telegraph Towers to say these things almost sounds like heresy, but it's true. They never had any intention of controlling inflation, no intention of reducing numbers. They are eco-zealots on the most...
What? What? What on earth is he talking about? The Tories have banged on for the past, since inflation really started to rise, that we've got to get inflation under control. Oh my God, the Tories are eco-zealots. All the way back to David Cameron. They've abandoned almost every single pledge to, you know, not only commit to net zero, but do things that would be, you know, green positive. I really have to wonder if Farage is trying to sort of reform his image, you know, from being a really hard right Tory, because he knows even maybe ex-UKIP supporters who he still, you know, milks for money. If you've seen the new Farage gin that's been launched recently. So at least it can sort of regain some more relevance. Maybe this is Farage trying to distance himself from the current Tory party that's gone incredibly far right, the direction that he wanted the party to go into. That's crazy. Oh, wow. Whew.
Astonishing scale. They put taxes up to the highest since Clement Attlee was in power. They have since 2010 denuded the Royal Air Force.
Okay, we'll get to that one in a moment. Correct me if I'm wrong, but while they put taxes up, Liz Truss is currently promising to put taxes down. And bear in mind, this video was done during the time where it was very, very obvious Liz Truss was about to win the contest, with her saying, I'm going to cut taxes. I'm going to cut taxes. And all he's really talking about is, oh, they've raised national insurance. What does national insurance go to? National insurance went to helping to pay and put more money into the NHS. Again, Nigel doesn't like the NHS. So, oh, Casper Northerner, good evening to you. Yeah, I do generally agree there, Ben. I do agree with you on that.
The Navy, the Army, law and order in many parts of our big cities is now gone. And I mean gone.
So, defense budget. Even before this, Ben Wallace increased the defense spending to match the, not only, I think we were up to 3% of GDP was going forward on military spending. So that had already been announced. This idea that, oh, they're not helping the Royal Navy, the Air Force, the Army. Even before that, there was a lot of money going to the UK armed forces. This is Farage trying, I think, to lean into some populism. And I think this is sort of plays to the wrong audience. And now this would certainly play to more a US audience, where if you say that, you almost get, cheers of joy. You go, armed forces, hooray! And any member in who's in our chat this evening from the US, I think will quite agree. You only just have to say, here's, hooray for the army, and you get massive applause. Doesn't matter. What you have to say about that. It's just army, hooray! So sort of playing to the wrong audience there, Farage. You're playing to a British audience, remember, not an American audience, but maybe he's anticipating building that audience maybe a bit. It doesn't surprise me. Law and order, gone. Hey, give him credit where credit's due, but a broken clock can be right twice a day. He is right on that. Austerity pretty much did wipe out most of the police force, and even under Boris Johnson pledging to rebuild a lot of the numbers in the police force. You've got to remember, we're looking at currently still criminal barristers are still on permanent strike. That's still a thing. So our courts aren't working at the moment and haven't been working since Monday. So he's so right on that. Let's but probably for the wrong reasons. I'm sure. Something you can blame the Tories for, but
to the point that without a sort of Rudy Giuliani, New York style, tough, hard man attitude, may never come back. We've seen no connection.
What's Rudy Giuliani got to do? What's Rudy Giuliani got to do with UK politics? Okay. Like I say, I'm not too familiar. I know that he's Trump's lawyer, and I know he's like the ex-mayor of New York. And I saw him in like a documentary on Netflix because I know he got big because he was like influential in like busting the mafia in New York City back in the day. Fear City, by the way, New York versus the mob. Good documentary. But other than that, I don't really know. He's making a lot of, as we already said, that's 2 times now he's played to sort of a more of American audience than the British audience, which is kind of strange, but there you go. Chris Town. He introduced a zero tolerance policing strategy in New York at one point. That would probably be why then, Chris. That is probably why Rudy Giuliani is being brought up there.
With small business, with entrepreneurship, with sole traders, purely a preoccupation with the big global corporates. I have absolutely no idea what the Conservative Party is.
Farage himself, during his time in UKIP, didn't really appeal to small businesses. Most of the money that Farage took during his time at UKIP, during the Leave campaign, was from big money, big corporation donors. So, Farage has got some cheek about, saying that they're ignoring small businesses, because Farage did as well. So this is, I think what we're seeing Farage here is, I think you might be seeing a calculated plot. If he really thinks that the Tory party is going to self-implode, a guy who has been championing all the Tory policies that they currently want to do, then he is trying to distance himself from the Tory party. And I think he is hoping that if this implosion, as he's been talking about, actually happens, and this destruction, maybe we might be seeing Nigel Farage, Conservative MP. It's not beyond the realms of possibility. This could be what he's trying to tee up.
Having helped them get their 2019 victory more than any other human being outside the Conservative Party, I'm sorry, it's a strong word, but I despise what they've done, what they've become, the weakness of their so-called leaders.
He despises what they've done and what they've become. Yet one of the main goals, as stated by Nigel Farage, one of the main goals of UKIP was to push the Tory party from being a centre-right party, as it had become under David Cameron, to pushing them to becoming a more far-right party. It's like you've got 2 different Farages here, You've got 2 different Farages. I think you've got this Farage that we're looking at right now, who is, I think, trying to set himself up for the future in some way. And yeah, you are right, Cathology. He's tried 7 times to be elected as an MP and failed every single time.
their total lack of connection with the real world. I thought Cameron and Osborne were out of touch with real people. This lot are even more out of touch. And I've actually got to the point, I hope they lose.
This guy praised, to begin with, praised Theresa May and said that she was the woman to get Brexit done. Praised Boris Johnson, and several times has praised our current Prime Minister, Liz Truss, as Foreign Secretary and International Trade Secretary for doing all these wonderful Brexit things. So why is he now saying that he despises the current Conservatives? What has happened for him to do that? I'll go back to what I've just said. I think Farage is trying to alter his image, and I think he's trying to maybe set the stage for maybe creating another political party. It's not beyond the realms of possibility. He's done it before. He would certainly do it again, but we'll just have to see. Yeah. Exactly right. Yeah. Cameron and Osborne are out of touch, says the man who hobnobs with billionaires such as Murdoch and Trump. Yeah, exactly. Because you've got to remember, Farage would always be that guy who, at these UKIP meetings would, oh yes, I'm a man of the people. Look at me in the pub, even though UKIP would buy out the entire pub, chuck out all the locals, and then bring in anyone who basically bought a UKIP ticket to meet Nigel Farage. And of course, all the photos of him, drinking a pint and pint glass in his hand. Oh, look, there's Nigel Farage, man of the people. Yeah. It's shocking how many people bought that line and that image, hook, line, and sinker. Yeah. That's a fair point, Pretty Bird. That's a fair point. Because remember, in 2020, Farage was, as you said, going to go on the high-paid speaker circuit. He was going to go do his lap of victory in America, do the whole, look at me, I got Brexit done, look how fantastic I am in and around America. But along comes COVID and cancels every single engagement he had on that speaker circuit. And also went all that money as well. So you are right. He is definitely trying to, I think, regain some sort of relevance. But do not buy this new act that he is selling. It doesn't surprise me now if Farage tries to position himself as the biggest critic of the current Tory government, when this is exactly the type of Tory party he wanted in the first place. This is the party he wanted to create with UKIP. This is what UKIP was all about, pushing the Tories more to the right. He even said he succeeded in doing that. So what's wrong suddenly with all these policies? He's trying to, as Pretty Bird has pointed out, trying to regain relevance, and I think he's trying to change his image. Certainly, definitely trying to regain his image, because I think he knows that anyone associated with it who is sort of Tory-like he certainly was, I think he knows they're in for a very tough time, and I think he doesn't want to get lumped into that.
I hope they lose big, because that's the only way we're going to get a recalibration of what the Conservative Party really is.
Well, the history of the Conservative Party is one of adaptation, and it's been one of the most flexible political organisations in world history. It's the most successful political party there's ever been, and it's able to adapt and reinvent itself at various different general elections. If you look at 2010 to 2015 to 2017 to 2019, these all had different iterations of what the Conservative
Yes,
Party
and it
was.
reinvented itself in 2019 as a party that believed in Brexit. And implicit in that was it believed in border controls. Look what's going on.
So now we see why Farage is annoyed. It's all those, oh, look at all those small boats. Oh, why aren't we controlling our border? The reality is now, Farage cannot complain about EU migration. Because, like I say, we've left the EU, we've left the single market, we've left the customs union. That means no more freedom of movement. So we can't complain about that anymore. And that was Farage's bread and butter for years. That's what his bread and butter was. So now he's trying to sell people this idea that our borders are not secure. This is exactly what you see in America with any Republican that talks about, the southern border. It's very, very similar rhetoric. Very similar rhetoric, if you look at that, which isn't a surprise.
They can't play that game again.
But they've got a new leader coming up soon, probably Liz Truss.
Yeah.
Can she turn things around?
Well, can a Remainer who voted 3 times for Mrs. May's total sellout, treacherous sellout, some would say, of the Brexit deal, who appeared...
May's deal was not treacherous. That was just a soft Brexit. And we've said many, many times that, look, what happened here, you had this revolution, like with many revolutions, what happens is sometimes the zealots take over and they push their revolution to the hardest possible extreme. Look at almost any revolution, from the French Revolution that started off wanting to put constraints on the king to essentially getting rid of the king and becoming a republic. It was the same for the English Revolution as well. We're Parliament. We don't want to get rid of the king. We just want to put controls on him. Eventually, it became, we need to get rid of the king. We need to put him on trial. We need to get rid of him. And that was pushed by the most hardened zealots at that time. And it's exactly the same with what happened with Brexit. Theresa May's deal was Brexit. But it wasn't a hard enough Brexit for the zealots like Nigel Farage. That's what you see. And remember, Liz Truss is now an incredibly hardcore Brexit zealot. And I generally do think that she knows herself, if she is to, or at least perceived to be, giving into Europe, the right will come after her. The ERG will say, what are you doing? And if not, they'll get rid of her. So she knows that herself. So we're going to see a lot, I mean a lot of hard rhetoric, I think, on Brexit in the coming, in the coming administration as well. Just, like I say, 88% of our current government is ERG members. That's the current state of our government.
Years to have been on this extraordinary Damascene conversion. Is it real? Is the first question I would ask. I don't know the answer to that, nor do you. Does she have the character, the temperament, the depth of personality to take on these huge challenges, these huge reforms that need to be made, when she's going to have the civil service, the BBC, much of the press against her? I don't know. I mean, someone who knows her well said to me, well, Nigel, the one good thing is she's mad enough to perhaps try and do anything. Well, maybe that's the upside. But the evidence is, Oscar Wilde, wasn't it, that once said that second marriages were the triumph of optimism over experiences. And this is now the fourth Conservative leader in 6 years. And every time we say, it's going to be great. Theresa May is going to be wonderful. No, she wasn't. She was a disaster.
Well, only the hard Brexiteers would say Theresa May was a disaster. But hey, that's just, as we said, the hardcore zealots and Brexiteers, because people like, Farage want an even harder Brexit. Bear in mind, these hardcore zealots, we are probably going to see a real hardcore push for a lot of breaks, with Europe. And part of the worrying thing with Jacob Rees-Mogg being made the business and energy sector, you've put congratulations, Liz, you've put a massive climate denier and climate skeptic in charge of an office where we need someone who can run our energy policy effectively during this time of massive crisis. Someone who doesn't even believe in green energy solutions. And then he's the business secretary. Jacob Rees-Mogg is in charge of a raft of legislation that he could just get rid of. You may remember at the start of the Boris administration, Kosi Katang, the then business secretary, started making noises to get rid of the working time directive. Now, he stopped doing that because there was a big pushback against it. Jacob Rees-Mogg? Absolutely not. Mogg is going to, I think, start to get rid of a lot of protections we've taken for granted in this country. I really think we are going to see that. It's really going to be bad. It really is. But yeah, you are. Yeah, he is. You are right. You are absolutely right there. Nigel is part of the problem. As you've said, 4 Tory MPs and 6 chancellors. We've had a education secretary almost every year for the past 7 years. We've had so many people over this period of time. We've had not even a housing secretary that's lasted longer than 8 months. And people wonder why we're in a housing crisis. And that goes way back beyond 2016. So, yeah, if you look at the exit and entry rate between some of these ministers and how long they've remained in office, it's shocking. It really is, but it just goes to show you how quickly people in the Conservative Party have just blown through almost all their members, and they're now scraping the bottom of the barrel at the moment, especially so with this cabinet. And this cabinet, it's even more far right than that of Margaret Thatcher. And that's very worrying. Very worrying. Yeah, Catherine, yeah, you're right as well. New Justice Secretary every year too. In fact, I don't actually know. That's something I don't know. I was thinking that as well. I thought that the new... Yes, it has. Just confirmed 3 hours ago. The Brexit opportunities role has been ditched. What did I say? What did I say when Boris Johnson was gone and during this time? I said full well that position isn't going to exist because it's embarrassing. You've got a minister who's dedicated to trying to find Brexit benefits, and Jacob Rees-Mogg in that position hasn't found a single one. If there was a serious Brexit benefit, Brexiteers like Nigel Farage and all the rest would be shouting from the rooftops about it non-stop. So, of course, the position was embarrassing. It makes Brexit look bad. So out it goes. What a surprise. What a surprise.
Boris Johnson's going to be great. We elected him as a Conservative. He governed as a Liberal. And now we're thinking Liz Truss is going to be great. Where is the evidence to back any of that up? I will say this. For the sake of the country, I hope I'm wrong. And I really do mean that. But I doubt that I am. And I
everything the current Tory party wants to do, Nigel Farage is in full agreement of. He's just doing this because he wants to try and separate himself from the current Tory party. That's the only reason he is now trying to do this and trying to affect this change. I think he's going to try and pull, he's the only true Tory. I think that's what he's trying to pull, and that's the position he's trying to maneuver himself into. He's the only true Tory there is left. Makes sense. It makes a lot of sense.
I don't think that the London-based political class, dare I say, in Telegraph Towers media, understand just how repulsed up to 50% of 2019 Conservative voters are.
The recent polling is fascinating. The Leave voters are dropping the Conservative Party in swathes. And as you say, Liz Truss is a Remainer. However, she has become the sort of Brexiteer representative of...
Looking at those polls, the main reason is it's not because Brexit isn't working. It's because the promises that Brexiteers like Nigel Farage put forward in 2016 are not being delivered. They pretty much promised, if you vote for Brexit, it's all going to be fantastic. It's all going to be the land of milk and honey. You know, that's what they were promising in 2016. It's going to be all wonderful. It's going to be all fantastic. Look at the fantastic, bright future. The second we leave the EU, we're all going to be on the gravy train. Except that's not what happened. That's not what happened at all. I think people are starting to cotton on to that now. People, I think, really are starting to cotton on to that. Because remember, the Leave campaign openly said, yeah, we're not going to leave the single market customs union. You know, my favorite, you know me by now, my favorite line from Daniel, the brain of Brexit Hanan, the man who was brought out by the Leave campaign of, if you've got a Brexit question, then Dan's the man with the answer. Said it plain as day. No one is talking about leaving the single market or customs union. Only a fool would leave the single market. So remember, when it comes time to rejoining the single market customs union, because people realize, well, actually, it was an awful idea, we don't have to have a referendum. We don't have to have a vote or anything. We just reapply. It's not against the will of the people. It is exactly what many people in 2016 voted for. And if they really want to have a referendum, let's do it. You know, I guarantee you, staying in the single market customs union or rejoining the single market customs union would be an absolute winner every single time. Because you've seen the summer of chaos. You've seen the chaos at the airports. That is going to be every single year. You've seen all this, trouble with the farmers that they have had every single year for the past 2 years now. We've had the sewage on our beaches for a second year. Do you think when people are cottoning on to this that our beaches and our rivers being polluted every single year because the Tories voted to ditch a load of clean water EU rules that were brought in? Do you think that's going to be a good look for them? Absolutely not.
This leadership campaign. Very briefly, let's talk about her rival, Rishi Sunak. Why has he failed to connect with Conservative voters?
Goldman Sachs globalist. End of.
Remind me which bank Nigel Farage worked for. Remind me which bank Nigel Farage worked for years. Oh,
That's what he is.
That's
That's what he is.
Yeah.
I mean, what more do you want to know?
And globalist, Brexit is a globalist project. It says that we don't, that we should be trading with all over the world and importing all our goods and things that we need. It is the most globalist project you can think of.
And utterly fraudulent. Did make me laugh, though. His little video that he made on the cross-channel migrant crisis had me in it. And then he was wearing a wax jacket. It was brand new. He'd never owned one before. And the next day, he's at a pub, meeting the boys in the pub and pulling pints. I mean, don't make me laugh.
You mean exactly like what you did, Nigel. You worked for one of the biggest banks in the entire world. You started talking constantly about immigrants and the problems that they face, and of course EU immigration, how bad it was. You banged on about that constantly. You banged on about all those Syrian migrants coming in with that infamous poster, "We're at the breaking point." And then, of course, to top it all off, you would go to the pub to get numerous pictures of yourself with a pint. Who does that remind you of? Oh, that's right. That's right. That's right. it's Nigel Farage. Rishi Sunak was doing a Nigel Farage. Is this why Nigel Farage is really pissed? Is really annoyed because Rishi Sunak stole his shtick? T524. I don't know how it is in the UK, but in America, right wingers use the word globalist to say the word Jews. Not really. Well, at least not yet. It's not the case over here in the UK. Globalist in the UK still very, very much means that the UK should be, taking its place in the world and should be at the center of all, global affairs and, making decisions and running the world and be a high flyer and all this. That's still essentially what globalism means to many right wingers here in the UK. And of course, it was used very much in 2016 to say, well, if you're a globalist, that means that those people, those elite remainers, do not care what happens in your local area, but these local areas relied on many of these big businesses to provide a lot of jobs, and not just the big businesses, but small and medium companies as well.
Utterly fraudulent at every level.
So when you look at the senior leadership of both the Conservative and Labour parties, compare that to the sort of historic precedent of the politicians that we've had, are we in a glut of politicians at the moment where there's no competent people, there's no historic figures who are ready to turn things around?
I mean, look, if we go back through time, we have been plagued by incompetence. I mean, Gilbert and Sullivan made a very good living out of this, back in the late 19th century. But there are...
Brexit has exposed that as a fact that we aren't governed that well. And that has been because we've had a Tory party for the past, 12 years that has continued on an ideological path, regardless of what might be a better path, but have pursued the ideological one because that's the path they are on now. We've seen that today with Liz Truss rejecting windfall tax and saying, she's going to freeze energy bills. But then we're all going to have to suffer for higher energy bills for years to repay all this money. Yeah, this energy plan is not going to be, this energy plan is going to become toxic, absolutely toxic for the Tories. It's going to be 100% toxic. They may be cheering it today, but trust me, when they start getting letters, when they start reaching, getting letters from their constituents about this, things are going to start turning. Things are going to start turning pretty quickly, especially with those red wall Tories. Very, very quickly. In fact, I don't know if Jake Berry has made it into the cabinet, but he's one person who I thought might have, given the fact that he is the leader of the Northern Research Group, those red wall Tories, that intake of those 2019 Tories. I'm very surprised I haven't seen him. He might have. Maybe he's slipped in, but I haven't seen it being announced.
Big figures that appear all through time. Attlee himself, a remarkable figure. I mean, whether you agree with the welfare state 80 years on or not is another question. But I mean, wow, imagine that. You win an election and set this apparatus up of a National Health Service and all these things. Amazing. Churchill, obviously, well, that speaks for itself. Thatcher, clearly a giant figure. Blair, enormous. Enormous. I don't agree with the fact that our population's risen by 8 million since 2002. He started it, but hey, it was the Tories that continued it. So we have seen big figures over the years.
Oh no, having a bigger population. Oh no. Shock horror. Who cares? You've got a bigger population. That means you've got a bigger tax base. That means you've got more workers that can contribute to the country, who can work in the NHS, who can work in care homes, who can contribute to people's pensions and, help us with our own demographic problem that we're having a massively aging population. And to be honest, we're about, I think it's been said before, about 10. No, I think we're more than that. I think we're about like 15 to 20 years behind Japan, where they currently are with their own massive demographic crisis that's a massive time bomb that's going to hit them soon. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Farage hates the welfare state. Of course he does. Of course he does. Of course he does. Oh, Alexander, good evening to you. So Jake Berry did slip in then. So he's a secretary without a role. So basically he's been given a position, but he's got nothing to do. I think that's sends a large message that Liz is trying to keep those MPs on side. But like I say, I think when winter comes, I think those Tories, even they're going to be like, sounding the alarm bells, because this Tory shift, even more further to the right, is not going to sell well. These policies are not going to go down well in the Red Wall.
Years. We've seen principled figures over the years. I look at the current leadership of the Labour Party and what I think we're going to get next week with the Conservative Party, and they just all look like career politicians to me. I'm sorry, maybe I'm getting old, maybe I'm becoming too cynical, but that's how it appears to me. They're not great people. And great people, it doesn't mean you have to agree with them, but they can still be great people because they represent something, they stand for something. What do these people actually stand for?
One of the people you mentioned was Mark.
Part of the reason why there is a dearth of talent in the Conservative Party, first of all, Boris Johnson very much kicked out most of the sort of good Tories, the ones that could actually do something. In fact, we saw that today. We saw Liz Truss. Who is it that Liz Truss kicked out now? Because this was a classic case of an actual Tory that was sort of doing a somewhat good job, but he got kicked out. Who is it now? Let me try and find it. where was it? He was like he's the minister for veterans. I'm trying to find it where his name was. I can't find it. But you may have seen the news this morning about his wife calling Liz Truss an absolute muppet. For booting him out of the office that he was in. Johnny Mercer, that may have been it, Capital OG. That actually may have been it. You are right there. That may have been it. I can't remember now, but it might have been it. I can't remember. He was one of the instances of a rare Tory who that's all he cared about. He wanted to be that minister. And even before he got that ministerial position, he worked hard to work towards that because that was the job he wanted. That was what he cared about. And in post, from what we can see, he actually did somewhat of a good job in it. Now, yeah, he's still a Tory, so I'm pretty sure if we looked into this deeper, I'm pretty sure we'd be able to find examples of, well, actually, he wasn't maybe that good. But yeah, you've lost another somewhat decent middle-ish Tory that could really handle an office. They're gone. He's now on the back benches, and Liz Truss has made another enemy on the back benches. Chatty Rat. Mercer was for letting soldiers who committed murder in NFI off the hook. Well, yeah, I thought he wouldn't be that good. You know, he is a Tory. Let's give him that. But this was again one of the Tories in quite a senior cabinet. Well, not a senior position, but it was a cabinet position nevertheless that is perceived to be quite prestigious. And yet, if you look back, he was one of the people from Boris Johnson's cabinet, along with Theresa Coffey, by the way, who you didn't hear that too much of. Yes, Theresa Coffey, I think, got caught, I don't know, singing I Had the Time of My Life at a very inappropriate moment during the Johnson years, certainly. But you don't hear too much else of the Johnson years because of this guy. You don't hear that like his office was like, you know, failing anyway, that, you know, like veterans were getting a raw deal or anything like that. I'm sure if we looked into it, we'd be able to find out more into it, as you know, Chatty Rats brought up here. But the fact that he's been kicked out, it becomes very, very interesting that once again, these incompetent Tories do not like anyone who is competent because it shows them up. Oh, yeah, that's another thing as well. And that goes even further. The University of Leeds, where Liz Truss' his dad is a father, has actually put a blanket ban on anyone talking about what her dad has said about her. Like, no one's allowed to do any interviews or anything like that. Even her own father doesn't want to do any interviews because he just hates, as you've said here, what she has indeed become. Oh, Tom Nilsson, hello to you.
Margaret Thatcher, and she's become very relevant in this leadership campaign. She's become the historical reference of both candidates. Both candidates are trying to emulate some of her grit, some of her sort of bravery and courage in the face of the socialism that she faced in the 1970s, and of course Soviet communism at the time as well. Do you think that Liz Truss can in any way replicate that Thatcher spirit?
Well, she might wear the same clothes, and she might try and sound the same. I doubt she's even half the person. I may be wrong. I doubt she's half the person. Look,
yeah, Liz Truss is not a Margaret Thatcher in any way, shape, or form. Liz Truss is not a Margaret Thatcher.
Party has lost half of its votes since 2019. Just sort of reflect on that for a minute. All the Boris lovers out there. Oh my God, it's terrible. Seller's remorse. Just reflect on the fact this man lost half your vote in 2 years. That's why he's gone. He's not coming back. To get those people back is going to take an enormous effort to re-engage working Britain and working class Britain. It's going to need something really, really special. Now,
really? So, do you think that Liz Truss's energy policy that's going to be announced tomorrow, where she's going to tell all the working class people of Britain that, guess what? You might have to pay higher energy prices because of I'm going to borrow so much money to pay back the energy firms over the next 15, 20 years. Yeah, I'm sure that's going to go down an absolute storm. This is why I keep on saying this policy, I think, is going to become really, really toxic very, very quickly. They might have been cheering it today and maybe even tomorrow, but who knows? This time next week, there may be a lot of Tories going, yeah, this isn't a good idea. Maybe we should do a windfall tax.
if I was a Tory member, I'd vote for her, not for Rishi. On the element that the gamble of her is worth it in the sense that maybe she'll surprise. But I just think the brand is dead. I don't know what it represents. I'll be honest with you. I think right now they're headed for a 97 style wipeout. I really, really do. And frankly, they deserve it.
Let's talk a little bit more about Margaret Thatcher. This is a
good. I'm glad. If that happens, good. I'm glad. That's one of the things that me and Nigel can agree on. If that happens, that will be good.
fascinating politician, someone that you've admired throughout your political
Absolutely.
life. And there are many debates within the Conservative Party today as to whether we should go for a Thatcherite economic policy, whether at the moment we've been through 20 years of what they call statism, or, as you mentioned earlier, taxes at the highest they've been since 70 years. So huge regulations, massive welfare state. So this is one argument. And the solution to that is Thatcherism, it's neoliberalism, it's cutting welfare, it's cutting taxes.
Look, the direct comparison with Thatcherism is ridiculous. We're now talking about 43 years ago. It's silly to compare one with the other. It's a real apples and pears job.
But we've had politicians advocate for those policies very recently. Okay, this might be part of what we said earlier, that Farage is trying to sort of maybe distance himself a bit from the Tory party to become this, last true Tory, which is a possibility, but we'll see.
The underlying principles of Thatcherism, and I would argue Reaganism too, are very, very important. We've got ourselves into a mindset where big government presents itself as the answer to every single problem. And hey, who's been the big government party for the last 12 years? The Conservatives. At no point have the Conservatives rolled back the size of the state. And you can talk about the pandemic. I mean, have you driven up the M4 lately? You drive from Reading to Heathrow. It's like being in China. There are cameras everywhere, speed. Oh, you're absolutely terrified. You think,
what? What do speed cameras have to do with the big government? What's that got to do with big government? I'm confused. What does that have to do with big government? So yeah, we've got speed cameras to stop people speeding on the motorway. Oh no, big government. Now, of course, you can't mention the NHS because, well, if you may remember, I think it was a couple of years ago now, Farage got in quite a bit of trouble. Farage got in quite a bit of trouble a couple of years ago for saying that he wanted to get rid of the NHS and go to a private style US type of insurance system. And he got absolutely slated for it. So it's no surprise that he's not going to bring up the NHS for the example.
earth is going on in our country? And all of this in the last 12 years has happened under a Conservative government who seem to bow down to big things because big is good. They've ignored all the little people. Now, I do think the idea of reducing the size of a state, Brexit was the perfect opportunity to do that. A massively burdensome rule book.
Because we have left the European Union, the state has had to get bigger. Why? A couple of years ago, Nigel, I phoned into your show and asked you the same thing. You know, because we're going to leave all these different like European organizations that we all like the 28, well, at the time, 27 now, all the 27 countries plus us at the time would all pay into. These organizations were cheaper. So, yeah, we've got an environmental department at the moment, but we've had to increase the size of many of these things because the government has now had to increase the amount of things that it does because of Brexit. Shock horror. This all goes back to the free market fundamentalism of you've got to have as small a state as possible because you do not want any form of government intervention whatsoever. So this is why they want a smaller state. Then, of course, I don't know if you'll talk about, getting rid of regulations or regulators or, stuff like that. We'll see. So see how honest he is about talking about, decreasing the size of the state.
That our 5.5 million small traders and self-employed had to live by. This was the opportunity to get the burden of the state off them. The opportunity with financial services, still our biggest industry, not just in Canary Wharf or the city, but in Cardiff, in Birmingham, in Manchester, everywhere, insurance companies, etc. They haven't done a thing. They haven't done a single.
Like what? Again, every time a Brexiteer like Nigel Farage says, oh my God, all these burdensome regulations, all these small businesses, when I could have freed them. Okay, like what? What regulations were holding back these, what they were so burdensome that were holding down these small businesses? You say our financial sector could benefit. What regulations are holding back these financial sectors? What is it exactly that is being held back? Every single time, no concrete answer, because they know if they start talking about regulations, there are a lot of people that might go, actually, that's quite a good regulation. We probably shouldn't be getting rid of that. But then that's the plan. That's the ploy.
Thing. And Rishi Sunak says he's going to review all EU legislation in the first year of his program. I mean, what have they been doing?
There is an alternative vision of the last 20, 30 years of economic policy in Britain. And this comes from conservatives who are more on the Macmillan end of the argument. And they would say that Tony Blair was the heir to Margaret Thatcher. We've had economic liberalism since the 1980s. We've seen massive deregulation. We've seen the banks have been hugely prominent.
What deregulation?
Well, compared to the 1970s, Margaret Thatcher's deregulation has remained in terms of banking and industrial.
Absolute myth. One of the biggest myths you can ever encounter, that the 2008 collapse was because we deregulated the banking sector. No, we haven't. We taken it away from the Bank of England, who'd been doing it since 1694, and gave it to a bunch of tick-tock bureaucrats, failed traders, 2,000 of them in Canary Wharf, working for what is now known as the FCA. It was the bureaucratization of everything that led to it.
So yeah, he's talking about getting rid of regulators. He's talking about getting rid of the FCA, the Financial Conduct Authority, the people who make sure that bankers are following the rules. That if a banker is doing something that maybe exploiting the industry or something like that maybe they probably shouldn't be doing, they're the ones who regulate it. So, not surprising, trying to get rid of a regulator. Yeah, and you're right, as people are pointing out, Farage is a failed trader. I'm not sure actually how much of a failed trader is. I wonder what the losses. I wonder if that number's out there somewhere. The actual losses of like what Nigel Farage actually lost as a trader. I wonder what his losses what actually were compared to like maybe like one of his contemporaries.
Going wrong. And I remember very, very well talking to a very old financial market journalist, and he'd worked at the Express. He'd worked here for a bit. And I said to him, after Northern Rock went wrong, I said, what would have happened if the Bank of England had still been running, the banking and building society industry? It's all very easy, he said. The boss, Adam Applegarth, he would have been summoned to London. They would have met in the usual corner table of a Savoy Grill. And over coffee, he would have been told, pull your horns in or we'll act. And instead, all that expertise, all that knowledge was replaced by a bureaucratic regulatory model. That was what...
So do you not think that expertise is in that bureaucratic model? You know?
Blair did to Britain. Gave massive power to unelected... I mean, I moaned about Brussels all those years, but hey, we've got enough problems here with appointed, unelected regulators who interpret the law as they see fit. And terror...
Here we are. Oh my God. Unelected regulators. No country in the world elects their regulatory body. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I am pretty sure that there is not a single democratic government in the entire world who does that. And yeah, Perry, yeah, you were right. Yeah. So yeah, again, he's making the point, and apparently it was much better that all these big, important national decisions were made in, the dark corners of the restaurants. Yeah, because that's a perfect way to run the government. You do all these, backroom deals. Now, there is a perfectly good reason why we have all these regulators. And once again, Farage wants to get rid of them. Why? Because he, like the rest of the current Tory party, are free market fundamentalists. They want to get rid completely of any and all government intervention. Yeah. Unelected bureaucrats / regulators equal boogeyman. It doesn't surprise me if this is going to become part of Nigel Farage's new lexicon. I spent years campaigning against all these unelected bureaucrats. Well, now look at it. We've got all these unelected regulators. No country in the world, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure no country in the world goes and elects their regulators. Like, I'm pretty sure on that front. Because what happens, like, if they achieve that, then what? So now you can elect regulators. Does that mean people like you could be elected to that job? Are you qualified, Nigel, for that job? And I think this is the direction they want to go. Or at least one direction they might want to go. Because on one hand, you've got the idea of, let's just get rid of all the regulators. But on the other hand, there is another sneaky way they can get rid of regulations without having to say, oh, we've got rid of all the regulators. I think this is part of the other plan. I think you're going to see Nigel push for heads of the regulating bodies like the FCC be brought in to be voted for in some way, shape, or form, meaning that essentially, should we say, Farage's perfect choice of candidate can be brought into these regulatory bodies and then just start gutting it from the inside. It's entirely possible. That seems to me, the way that Farage seems to be pushing it, calling them unelected regulators.
Verify. I mean, speak to anybody, whether it's in compliance or HR in companies. I mean, people living in fear of these people and this culture. And in 12 years of Conservative government, none of that's been turned around. Indeed, Liz Truss, it seems, wants to bring a new law to stop builders wolf whistling at women as they walk past the street. And you ask me, is Truss going to turn things around?
Well, I'm just curious, Thatcher's reforms may have gone too quickly. And for example, those communities, the mining communities, the communities that existed, that were based on
Do you mean
industries.
they're now Conservative voting mining communities?
Well, one could argue that they had a massive economic sort of destitution that resulted in huge levels of depravity that are still permeating to today.
Holy moly. Holy moly. A guy... hot damn. give that boy a cookie. Give that boy a cookie. Those are probably the most truest words spoken about former mining communities in the entire Torygraph office. Give that boy a cookie.
And there are some Conservatives who argue that Thatcherites and neoliberals, they focus too much on this efficient economic argument about free trade and globalization, and there's not enough focus on standards of living.
No. Look, these are outdated arguments. This is a re-rehearsal of what we were talking about 40 years ago, 30 years ago. We are now where we are. So do we want the state to be smaller? Yes.
Those, Nigel, are still valid arguments. Those are still valid arguments. You can still argue about that, Nigel. It's not relevant because, oh no, we're here now. Again, Nigel trying to push away the fact that, again, I think trying to very much instill that, oh, I'm a, Thatcher conservative. I'm the last true Thatcher conservative in the Tory party. While not wanting to talk about, again, standards of living. Yeah, it's an outdated argument, Duke of Vengeance. What are you talking about? Didn't you hear Farage? That's just an outdated argument.
Do we believe the free market supplies solutions to every single problem, including just-in-time supply chains? No, we don't. We believe there is something called the national interest. We believe there is something called security. We believe in self-sufficiency. I mean, the Conservative government closed the Rough storage facility on the East Coast, our gas storage facility. Why? We didn't need it. Because the big global companies have told us that just-in-time supply chains are enough. No.
No, that wasn't the case at all. I'll let you believe that fantasy, Nigel. I'll let you believe that fantasy. It was closed because it was seen as by the Tories, not by the big gas companies, because the big gas companies said, yeah, if you close that gas storage, it will be a bad idea because we'll be more at the mercy of Russia. We'll probably have to buy more gas. And if there are gas shortages anywhere, us not having a big capacity storage of gas will be quite bad. And of course, us for the UK, we generate a lot of our electricity comes from gas. So us getting rid of that gas storage, which again was a Tory policy, very bad. But once again, Farage trying to distance himself from the Tory party.
There is a case here. There is a case here for strategic economic nationalism. Does that run contrary to lifting the burden of regulation of small people? No, it doesn't. It's a different economic imperative. And I bet you if Thatcher was alive today, she'd be saying, the hell we're going to sell, chip companies, steel companies to the Chinese. There's no way that Margaret Thatcher, the great Friedmanite, would have done those things, because some things are more important. And so you've got a Conservative Party with the worst of all worlds. It doesn't appear to believe in capitalism in the sense of the small entrepreneur getting on. It doesn't appear to ever act in the national interest. I mean, what the hell is it?
Let's talk about
staying in the EU would have been in the national interest, that's true. Not only that, Nigel Farage talking about, again, the small entrepreneur. Farage has never cared about the small entrepreneur. So why is he starting now? Because he wants to distance himself from the current Tory party, because I think he wants to be the last true Tory, to quote the phrase.
inflation. Now, this is one of those massive problems, a disease of money, as I know you once called it.
I do. I still do every day.
This was a huge issue in the 1970s, and it's, again, a huge issue. People could be seeing 20% real terms pay cuts this year.
Well, actually, here we are. So Liz Truss taking over in a couple of days, and you've got the NHS crisis, the cost of living crisis, the potential energy crisis, crisis upon crisis. One crisis no one's talked about, the potential sterling crisis. Nobody has even thought. It's all too difficult. It's money. It's in the city. We mustn't bother our little heads with that. Well, I tell you what, cable, sterling dollar has fallen from 130 to 116 over the course of the last few weeks. Unless you've been on holiday.
I have, Nigel. I've talked about that. I've just done a video on it. And it's this entire crisis, this sterling crisis is talking about, linked to all the other crises that we're talking about. Inflation, Brexit, all these other crises that are causing investors to leave in droves and businesses to be unsure as to what even to invest in. What do they even do since 2016? That's part of it. So problem that Nigel Farage is infinitely somewhat responsible for, not totally, of course, but responsible in some way. Not surprising.
Or you trade overseas, you wouldn't have noticed. Why does it matter? Because we're not self-sufficient in energy, because Boris insisted we would not be self-sufficient. We'd build ridiculous numbers of wind farms and import vast amounts of gas, oil.
Wait, we rebuild ridiculous numbers of wind farms. No, we don't. Partly because David Cameron, forced by the ERG to not build all that green crap, according to Jacob Rees-Mogg, so we don't have all those wind farms that would be helping us out massively right now if they had been built.
And indeed some coal that we still need for steel. We buy gas and oil in dollars. The world trades commodities in dollars. The weaker the pound is, the more pounds we have to pay to buy the oil in dollars, the even higher consumer prices go with people's gas bills, company gas bills, and everything else. And if you look at it, it's very interesting. It isn't just the pound that's weak. This is not 1976 and the IMF bailout. The euro's broken parity with the dollar. Why? 1 6-word answer: energy. We have problems in that we can't exist without. I mean, did you know that we imported electricity from Norway? Just astonishing.
No, Nigel, this shouldn't be shocking to you. This was brought up during 2016. This was talked about. If we leave the EU, we leave a whole different sectors and all kinds of stuff. And one of the things we leave is, let's say another country in Europe is having less energy transferred to them. Instead of Norway transfer that energy to us, they could instead transfer it to Finland, or they might transfer it to Sweden or another EU country. Because under EU law, that's how it works. So it's not shocking, but Farage is still very much on this train of, oh my God, sufficiency, sufficiency, sufficiency. Because this is a classic sort of not only boomer, but even pre-boomer UK desire for some reason. We are an island. We need to import so much stuff into this island as we have for years. Thank you very much, Cathal OG. Thank you very much for your support as always. Liz Truss would give ministers power to override the financial regulators if they hold back post-Brexit reforms, said the FT. Reuters, thanks as usual. Again, very worrying that she's giving ministers the power to override regulators. Very, very worrying. You saw when Donald Trump came in, Donald Trump brought in this insane rule where if a regulator wanted to bring in a new regulation, then they had to get rid of 2 other regulations. Just think about that for a moment. So, how many regulations during the Donald Trump years do you think came in? Virtually nothing. Virtually no new regulations came in under the Trump years because of that ridiculous law that he signed that, oh, if you're a regulator, you want to bring in a new regulation, well, guess what? You want to bring in 1? Well, you have to get rid of 2. That's not how regulation works. Regulations are there for a reason. Sometimes it might sound a bit convoluted or anything like that, but you ask an expert in the field and they will tell you exactly why those regulations are in the first place. Sometimes it can be safety. Sometimes it can be stopping people getting scammed, stopping people and companies like cutting corners, making dangerous products, all sorts of reasons regulations can be brought in. Yeah, guys like this, like Farage, oh no, I want regulators to be democratically elected. Well, okay, elected by who and how exactly? You can see the chaos that just literally unfold from this. But that's what Nigel Farage wants. He wants this dream, this dream perfect Britain that he has that can never exist because most of these rules and laws would never work. But we've got a party now who is pretty prepared to put that in. And that's what's worrying me a lot.
Just astonishing what these globalist idiots in both parties have done to us. On a bad day, we import over 10% of our electricity. Now, Norway have now said, well, given where we are, there may be no more electricity. And the French, of course, when it comes to it, will do exactly the same. So we found out, we find ourselves in a real, genuine predicament.
Yeah, because they don't have to anymore. You were warned about this, Nigel, about the possibility of blackouts during the 2016 referendum, but oh well.
All of this. America is self-sufficient in energy. Trump guaranteed that. I fear, now there are some, Ambrose Evans-Pritchard has written very eloquently in the last few days about how the Germans have been building up stockpiles, realizing their error. And I take that point of view. However, I suspect there could be more shocks to come from Putin, Ukraine. I mean, hey, he's got us where he wants us. I mean, sanctions. Oh, we're putting sanctions on Putin. The sanctions are hurting us much more than they're hurting Putin. He's found new markets in India and China and elsewhere. So I fear
that's wrong. Actually, that's incredibly wrong. Those sanctions are hurting Russia incredibly badly. A new study from Yale about Russia's economy states just how bad things are getting in Russia. They are getting absolutely desperate. And they are trying as hard as they can to try and make things look like things are going well, to a point where they have stopped releasing certain financial data publicly, because they know if they release some of that financial data, well, it's not going to look that well. And then, of course, he says, oh, well, they found these new markets, China, India. Trade hasn't gone up with China or India from Russia, because these Chinese and Indian companies are terrified themselves of being sanctioned. So they don't want to trade with Russia. So again, I don't know whether he's lying intentionally there or what. I can't tell you. But again, it's Nigel Farage. He might very well be lying intentionally for all we know about that.
So I think sterling will run towards parity with the US dollar. That will incite panic. It will mean interest rates rising much, much faster than anyone thinks. And of course, inflation. If the pound falls, as a country that imports far too much, it could get to 25%.
This winter is going to be...
Brexit, according to Nigel Farage, according to many, many Brexiteers, was all about trade and all about importing more stuff. Why has Nigel Farage suddenly changed his tune on that? As we said at the beginning, Brexit was a massive, the biggest globalist project in the UK.
So difficult for millions of Brits, especially with, as you mentioned, energy prices skyrocketing. Many people might go without energy, might go without heat. This is a complete and utter disaster. How does one tackle this situation as a free market supporter, someone who believes it's shrinking the size of the state, as someone who believes that printing more money causes inflation?
Which I do believe in totally.
Absolutely. So do we have more handouts? Do we have furlough? How do we help people this winter, or do we let them be?
Well, I mean, first things first. There are some of us, and in fact, the man that put me onto it was Christopher Booker, Sunday Telegraph in 2000, who explained to me that the wind project, the lack of investment in nuclear, would mean we would at some point run out of energy. So full credit to the Sunday Telegraph. That's what first put me onto this 20 years ago. We need to become self-sufficient in energy. We need to start producing more food. No more of this build back beaver rubbish that Johnson talked about. Or Boris said, it's funny, isn't it? The end of coal, he said, at COP26. It's the end of coal. So the Indians and Chinese this year will burn 4 billion tons, more than ever in the history of humankind. I mean, you realize the Tory party have lost it. They become a sort of...
You notice, by the way, how quickly he's run off the question. He's completely run off the question.
Metro liberal club, happy in their Notting Hill echo chamber and not linked with the real world. I have to say I'm short term.
Always back to it.
There is going to be no way round it but massive state handouts. And I'm saying that. Despite all my views and all my beliefs, there is going to have to be a massive state handout. Not to do so risks, I'm afraid, in a country that's been spoon-fed by the state, whether it's furlough or whatever it is, you've raised people's expectations of what the state will do for you. Not to do so will risk wholesale non-payment of bills and perhaps civil disorder that would dwarf the poll tax riots. Short term, she will have no choice. Forget all the business about VAT and green subsidy. I've been banging on about this for a decade and more. That's what will have to happen. Our debt will start to head toward...
Shockingly, I'm quite shocked. I agree with Farage here. If there is no state intervention, there could very well be riots and mass non-payment of bills. That will be a massive problem. And yeah, the state should intervene, and the state should be doing more. We are seeing other countries in Europe do stuff that we are not doing here for, I don't know, whatever reason. But Yeah. Wow. Wow. Maybe a single moment of honesty from Nigel Farage there.
Towards 2.5 trillion, maybe 2.75 trillion. Funny, isn't it? When Cameron became Prime Minister, it was 650 billion. And yet when I stood up in the leaders' debate in the general election 2015 and pointed out what had happened to the national debt, I was met by David Cameron saying, no, we've cut the deficit. And no one questioned him. We're led by morons. We're led by people who are economically illiterate. And that has run through both parties. We've not had...
Nigel Farage would not have been any much better if somehow magically, you know, Farage became Prime Minister. His economic ideas would not be any better because all the current stuff that the Tory party are doing is what he has campaigned for years for them to do.
Honest conversations with the British public. This particular situation, in the short term, is going to need, for those reasons of stability that I've talked about, a lot of state money. I hate saying that, but I've said it. We need a complete reversal of strategy. I do not want to nationalize. I don't want to nationalize state, turn gas, electricity, and oil companies.
Like in France with EDF.
I don't want to do that. But I wouldn't mind government investing or working as co-partners in developing the Bolan shale gas reserve. Fine. Absolutely fine. And then we can enjoy lower prices. Do not believe for a minute the Treasury rubbish, the Whitehall rubbish, that it doesn't matter whether we produce the gas or somebody else does, because it's all available at world prices. Look what American consumers are paying. Far less than we are. So a proactive government involved in industry.
But you also have in America a massive oil subsidized industry. It has a massive oil subsidized industry in America. So, of course, they have cheap prices, but Americans freak out if their gas prices rise by like 10 pence because they're so used to cheap gas to cheap gas and petrol. But yes, the lefty voter. You did hear that right. He did say that we are led by morons. Yes, you did. You did hear that right. He did say that. Yeah. And yet this economic literacy does not include Brexit. Funny that. Yep. Exactly right. The Farage would not be any better. But I have to wonder whether this really is a rebranding of Nigel Farage to be sort of the last true Tory. And maybe somewhat an attempt that if the Conservatives do implode, maybe he sees that as his opportunity to once again launch some new party to say, we are the true Conservative Party. It's possible. Yeah, lefty vote. Yeah, he's doing a reverse Joe Lycett. Yeah, exactly. That's why so many on the right got so annoyed at Joe Lycett, because Joe Lycett basically just held up a mirror and just said, "This is what you do on TV. Like, this is what you do. This is what you're seeing now." You know?
Co-investing with industry, but never nationalising it.
Now, you talk about an honest public debate. One of those areas where the Conservatives have not been honest is immigration. Now, you've been campaigning on this issue since 2004. Yep. You have become the synonymous...
And Farage won't have an honest conversation about immigration either, because he never, ever, ever talks about the benefits of immigration. He only ever talks about the negative.
Politician almost with that particular issue. And it's the issue that really helped UKIP rise to power in 2014, that helped deliver the Brexit vote in 2016. And obviously, after 2016, voters felt that they'd been listened to in a way. They felt that by leaving the European Union, finally we can take back control of our borders. The Conservatives
And
today,
they felt safe in 2019 with Boris on this issue.
absolutely. The Conservatives today, they argue that Brexit was about control and not about numbers. What do you say to that?
You know, this is your classic sort of public school, you know, Lord Hannon type argument. But immigration wasn't it? No, I go to the council estates in the Midlands and the North, or anywhere in the country. Speak to families who saw the wages compressed through massive levels of semi-skilled and unskilled labour coming into the...
That's not what the data says. That is not what the data says. Immigrants were not paid lower wages. Their wages were not depressed. We have something called the minimum wage. That from the time that Farage says that all these immigrants were coming in, not only did we get obviously the implementation of like a national minimum wage, it went up. If people are complaining about being paid less, then maybe they need to unionize. Maybe they need to unionize and start, you know, striking against the company for better pay and better working conditions. But of course, you can't have that. Can't let the plebs think that might be the answer.
the country. Speak to people whose kids can't go to the local primary school because it's full. Because we have a birth explosion, the likes of which we've never seen in this country in our history.
Why is that a bad thing? I said a few moments ago, we're facing our own demographic time bomb. And those births, well, they're British. Those are British citizens born in the UK. Why is that a bad thing? That's a good thing. And if you're complaining that schools are full, then what do you need to do, Nigel? You need to build more schools. What have the Tories not done? They've not built enough schools. They've not invested in not only just transport infrastructure, but civil infrastructure as well.
And vast numbers of those are born to foreign-born mothers. Doesn't make them all bad. I'm talking about numbers here. Talk to anybody who can't get a GP appointment.
Again, numbers. Well, that means you just have to expand things, and you have to plan for the increase in population. But we've had a government that hasn't prepared for this massive increase in this type of population, and instead, under austerity, has stripped away the very things, the very funding that could help prepare for that.
Appointment. Talk to anybody who can't drive on a motorway. The population's increased by 8 million since 2002, and 84% of that is directly because of immigration.
Wait, 84% of our population increase is due to immigration? I think that needs to be fact checked. Okay. Okay, yeah. Call me skeptical because the first result comes from Migrant Watch, which is a very, very right-wing source. I am highly skeptical that is actually a true number. So immigration, again, according to this comes from Migration Policy, but I don't know. Actually, Migration Policy Institute, are they reputable? I don't know. Oh no, these are professors, but I don't know if it's, again, don't have fully time to go check this out or not, because again, I sort of want to finish off this video with Nigel Farage. But yeah, not surprisingly, doesn't seem to be true. Doesn't seem to be true. And of course, if you do type this in Google, you find Migrant Watch, a very right-wing source, promoting it. I again don't have time to go fully research this fully, but I guarantee you that that statistic is wrong. I guarantee you that statistic is wrong. And yeah, you are right, Taylor. Good hello to you, database. Yeah, I think he's plucked that figure out of his fundamental. And good evening to you. So, of course, Nigel. Yeah, exactly. Nigel Farage would never lie. He would never lie. What are you talking about? Nigel Farage is the most honest man in all of the UK. What did I say before we even started on this? Nigel Farage only talks about the negatives of immigration. He never actually talks about the positives of immigration.
Labour started it, the Tories have continued it, and the reason they started voting for UKIP in huge numbers, the reason that the whole rebellion started that led to Brexit, to a huge Tory majority, is people said, enough. And what has happened in 2019? Yeah, we now see...
Because you kept on pumping people for the fear about immigrants. It's not a surprise if you... And bear in mind, since 2016, since Nigel Farage has disappeared from the sort of the political scene, very much so, since he stopped pumping out that rhetoric, people's fear of immigration has plummeted. I wonder why.
Last year, 1.1 million visas, legal visas, were given out. We're witnessing, I get emails every day from people just saying my neighborhood is now unrecognizable. And you know, when you live in a street where people speak the same language, where you have similar cultural interests, similar shared histories, there will of course be some bad apples, but there's a degree of self-regulation that goes on as the community itself has an identity. I don't believe in this rubbish of there's no such thing as society. Thatcher was completely wrong or misquoted about that. There really is. There really is. When you replace a street like that with a street in which no one knows the names of their neighbours, they've never spoken to them, where many in that street do not have shared histories, do not have...
I don't know the names of my neighbours. You know, I don't know. I don't know the names of half of the people that live in my street. But I don't think any of them are immigrants. Yeah, I'm a bad apple. Yeah, I'm a bad apple. I'm a bad apple. It doesn't matter. It doesn't give a single thing, a single flying fig. Doesn't really matter. Yeah. unfortunately, you are right, Ben. There are many Nigel lovers in these parts of South Yorkshire. Unfortunately, we almost voted one in Barnsley. You know, we came this close.
Shared cultures do not have shared interests, socially, sporting wise, whatever it may be, where many in that street don't even speak the same language, whose kids don't play together in the street or after school. Then you have a community that cares less about each other.
Why is that such a big problem? You know, here's the thing: if people have different values and different systems, that doesn't mean that people can't make connections. Instinctively, as humans, we are very social beings. We are very social animals. We will connect with different people. And people who come to this UK overwhelmingly can speak English. There are studies out there that have shown time and time again this idea of, oh, these people who come to this country can't speak English. Overwhelmingly, they can. And very often, they speak better English and even write better English than actual native-born people. Of course, you know, can't have that. But again, this is all part of Nigel Farage's, you know, oh my God, immigrants. Ooh, this is his, you know, classic bread and butter.
And more about itself. And it's more prepared to turn a blind eye to litter, bad language, graffiti, crime, whatever it may be. And I know I'll be condemned for saying this, but I'm going to say it. You break down our communities, you break down the civilized order that we've been used to. You have a recipe for lawlessness, a recipe for an unhappy society. And when you have immigration running legally and illegally at the levels you've got, there is no prospect, no hope of community cohesion, of integration actually going on. And since 2019, we've seen legal numbers just...
I've said it at the start of this video. Whenever they talk about immigration, they do not make any sort of distinction between legal or illegal immigration. To them, any immigration is just bad.
Spiral. I mean, forget about your kids buying a house. That ain't never going to happen. All these aspirations are never going to happen. And health.
There are numerous reasons, Nigel. It's not down to just immigration. Does immigration play a part of this? I'm sure it's a very small part, but it's not the main reason. There are hundreds of reasons why you can't buy a house. Remember, we're in a housing crisis because we've had a government for the past 12 years that has not built the type of houses we need. And I've said this before many, many times when we talk about this. There are sort of three different types of housing. You've got the low end, which is sort of flats and maybe bungalows, 2-bedroom type housing. Very, very small, you know, houses. You next get your big one. So that's your 3, 4-bedroom houses. And after that, anything becomes sort of a bigger house, your 5-bedroom pluses. Those are sort of the three types of housing that you get built into. And we've had years of the free market, as you said, being the solution to these problems. The free market has not built the low end of the house that are needed. And as a result, they've built the middle part, because if they build the big ones, they very often have been too expensive. So they've been taken a lot longer to sell. The small ones, even though they can build them and they can sell them, do not give them enough money or as much money as if they built the middle one. And that is what has been continuously built over the years by these private building companies and these housing companies that have made excuse after excuse not to build the lower end and the social housing that sometimes in the contracts they have promised the council to build, that buy vast tracts of land and then don't build on them for about 5 or 10 years. Because they know if they buy that land and start building on it, the houses then aren't worth as much. There's so many problems in this country, and immigration is not the root of the problems of these problems. It's not at all. But people like Nigel Farage want to convince you that it is. Yeah. Yeah. T5. This is the first year that I've actually talked to my neighbors, and you've been there since 2018. Yeah. Clearly, you're just one of the bad apples, T5. Clearly, you're just one of the bad apples. Yeah, and who else was it? Yeah. Yeah, clearly, again, the Feckle Bunny. You're just another bad apple. I mean, how dare you not talk to your neighbors? How dare you not create this sense of social cohesion? Again, it's harkening back to a time, once again, where there were all these different, social clubs, and people did pull together because there were no social safety nets. There were no, things to do. So of course there was a sense of sort of closer pulling to community, not because everyone lived on the same street and happened to know the names of the neighbor, but because they had to come together as a community. The Barnsley Museum has, I think, an exhibit on the co-op, and the co-op at one point used to do combined healthcare. So your entire street used to club together to pay for each other's healthcare. That was pre-NHS. But that's what they had to do. If someone on that street got ill, they would all club together. And by the way, you see that in the US. You see that all the time in the US happen as well. Even with their sort of, private insurance medical system that Nigel Farage says is far, far better. When they can't afford it, communities come together to do it. But of course, then that takes wealth out of communities, which then can create whole other sectors of problems.
Otherwise, well, if you can't afford private insurance, you're in big trouble. Big trouble. I'm about to do a story tonight on GB News about mouth cancer. We are now at the highest we've been ever because of lack of dental services that have taken place during the pandemic. And since, just one little example, but to tens of thousands of people, this is very, very, very real.
I'm sure it has nothing to do with years of the Tories cutting funding for the NHS. I'm sure it has nothing to do with that. Think about it. All these immigrants coming over here with their cancer. Oh, what is that the argument he's seriously making? Is that the argument that he's seriously making? The immigrants, and what reason why there is sort of a lack of cancer care in the UK is because immigrants are coming over with their, foreign cancers to get treated over here. Is Nigel Farage seriously making that argument? And yet, you're right. Mouth cancer have a link to smoking. You're all right. Yeah. So I'm sure that has no, input on maybe the rates of mouth cancer. It's almost like Nigel Farage is blaming well, he pretty very much is. He's blaming immigration for cancer rates in this country. How can you do that? It doesn't make any sense. Oh,
And then we witnessed the humiliation of what's happening in the English Channel and displacement of those people in hotels all over the country. I went to Sunderland. People were furious. What the hell is going on? And now in the last few weeks, the final humiliation. Huge numbers of Albanian criminals with their prison haircuts, their prison tattoos, coming into Britain to join the criminal gangs. How many more moped muggings? How many more knifings? How many more levels of gun crime do you need to understand the Conservatives have completely failed Britain?
If there's been an increase in crime, you look at the statistics and it's not immigrants that are causing crime. It's the native population are far more likely to do it. You know, just once again, it's lie after lie after lie. But this is Nigel Farage's bread and butter. He's been doing this for years, so it's of no surprise where you saw Nigel being asked those questions earlier, and he was very, very hesitant to answer, or he was answering one way and then he changed his answer, or he would go off in another direction or saying something. Second, we've come to the questions about immigration. You know, he's back on it because this is his bread and butter. This is what he's done for years.
To say any of what you've just said is extremely difficult, and I think in some ways courageous, because the debate over immigration has been one which has been toxic for the last 20 years. You've been on the receiving end of that.
Yes, because racists have... this is one of the things. The left should, I think, talk more about immigration. I think it's something that we on the left have not got to be afraid of talking about and tackling as a serious issue. I really think the left does need to come forward with a solution to these channel crossings, because okay, if people are concerned about these channel crossings, how do we solve them? Well, the simple answer is to make a safe route, you know, from the shores of France over to the UK, so that then these people do not have to rely on people smugglers or creating these, you know, rafts to get across the channel. That would be the most simplest answer, of course, if you want to stop these crossings. Would Nigel Farage be willing to accept that? I very much doubt it. I very much doubt it.
Personally, what it feels like to talk about this issue.
To be vilified.
To be vilified. And it seemed for a long time that immigration wasn't talked about. After Enoch Powell's Rivers of Blood speech,
he completely got that wrong. It was completely over the top. He'd given a similar speech in Walsall a few weeks before that hadn't been noticed. He was trying too hard. And he actually made the subject difficult to talk about for years and years.
And today, I feel perhaps that sense of not...
Immigration is not that big of an issue. It's not as big as the right loves to pretend it to be, but it's the classic you versus them argument that gets people divided, that gets people angry because, ooh, the reason why you can't go to the NHS or you can't buy a house or you haven't got a job, or, well, it's easier just to blame the immigrants. This has been done throughout human history, going all the way back to the Roman Empire. In fact, there's a very fascinating record that still exists of a discussion in the Roman Senate about giving Roman citizenship to immigrants who have come in to the Roman Empire. And the arguments against giving these people citizenship is almost to a letter, the exact same argument that Nigel Farage would say.
being able to talk about immigration has crept back in the last few years. Since the Brexit vote, since the issue was allegedly written off, that was it, immigration was done. Now again, you can't really talk about it. Do you agree with that?
I'm sorry, no, it's back. It's back. The public weren't talking about it because they thought it had been dealt with. You're quite right. You said that a few minutes ago. It is now back. It is now front and centre. It is, particularly in the Red Wall, the second most important issue behind, obviously, the cost of living crisis. This issue alone will cost them the next election.
I want to talk about the political implications of.
No, it won't. No, it won't at all. I think the cost of living crisis, I think the energy crisis, I think inflation, I think there's a ton of different things. Why aren't people worried about immigration? Because Nigel Farage hasn't been on the scene for quite some time, spreading, as you've just heard, his anti-immigration rhetoric.
Of immigration. Now you've talked about the economic and societal consequences of it. The political consequences. Are we going to see an insurgency?
By the way, Liz Truss also agrees with that as well. If you remember from the secret hidden recording that came out, where she called Britain's lazy workers, that there wasn't enough graft in the British workforce.
You referred to this in your recent Telegraph article.
I did, yeah. I mean, it's quite funny, really. I mean, for all the vilification I got, actually, I pretty much single-handedly killed off the British National Party and their rise. In sort of 06, 7, 8, 9, the BNP were on the march in many, many northern towns, winning council seats, you name it, even getting 2 MEPs elected under PR to the European Parliament. I saw Nick Griffin off because I said to BNP, I looked down the barrel at PNP voters and said, look, if you're voting BNP because you're unhappy, but you don't want to vote for an overtly outright racist party, come and vote for me. That was my pitch. That was my appeal. And you know what? It worked. It worked. I got 2/3 of BNP voters to vote UKIP. The third, who absolutely believed in what they believed in, and we can condemn that, but that's the world we live in. Stuck with them. But that
what does what does that say about the voter who went, well, I don't really like voting for UKIP because, well, I don't really like voting for the BNP because they're too openly racist. I'd rather vote for the for UKIP, who they're still racist, but they're not openly racist. We said it before. Nigel Farage sold this idea of what I call middle class racism, where it's all very wink wink nudge nudge type of thing, and that's what Nigel Farage sold as a concept. That
was the end of it. And there is a political vacuum that has opened up again in British politics on the right. And I suspect somebody will fill it. I suspect whoever comes along and fills that gap will make me look like a Notting Hill metropolitan member of the Liberal elite, because I suspect that's what's going to happen. And it'll be nasty, it'll be ugly. Here's the remarkable thing. The insurgency, the UKIP insurgency, built on patriotism, built on national democracy, built on national self-interest, built on border controls and the right levels of immigration within our communities and our society. It all happened during relatively benign economic circumstances. Yes, we had the great financial crash of 08, but it didn't really affect people. Government just increased debt, bailed the banks out, and everybody carried on.
Wait, the 2008 financial crisis didn't affect people? That's wrong. That's absolutely wrong. The 2008 financial crisis affected loads of people up and down the country. To say that it didn't is factually wrong.
Hardly anyone lost their jobs. Inflation didn't rocket. Interest rates did. All those things. And to have such a
people did lose their jobs.
Change take place in economic peacetime was a pretty remarkable thing. And now we're going into, recession. Who knows? Maybe depression. It's not completely impossible. We are going to see, if the D word happens, we will see very radical and possibly violent political change occurring within Europe and the UK. Now, I don't think any outside party in the UK can win power. The system is rigged against anyone new coming in. You can't raise money without the big donors being subject to inheritance tax. There's a first past the post system. There's a crooked postal voting system. So it may be that a political insurgency.
Wait, there's a crooked posting system? What? why is Nigel Farage trying to imply that there's a crooked postal voting system in the UK? What? Voting fraud in the UK never ever happens. It is so rare that voting fraud ever happens. Why on earth is he trying to bring that argument in? That doesn't make sense. What's he doing?
Doesn't win many seats in Parliament, but it will once again fundamentally reshape Conservatism.
We've done a few interviews now, Nigel, over the years, and I have to say, I don't think I've ever seen you so angry with the Conservative Party.
Betrayal. Nothing in life upsets you, whether it's at a personal level, a political level, a national level, than betrayal. And in 2019, at the start of that year, I'd managed to get the Brexit Party registered as a political party, just in case. It was my insurance policy. UKIP had gone off with Tommy Robinson and Neil Hamilton and God knows, Uncle Tom Copley and God knows who. And as it became clear that March the 29th was not going to be the day we left the European Union, I began to sort of, get ready, prepare. I launched it within 6 weeks, and it took off like a rocket. Within 6 weeks, in the European election, 5.25 million votes. Biggest party in Europe. I mean, how ironic is that? Mrs. May resigned before the results. I mean, what a bush. I was really proud of that. The press say, ruthless Boris Johnson got rid of it. No, he didn't. He voted for a third time round. I mean, ruthless, twice he voted against the deal. The third time he went with it.
So again, Farage, I think, is massively overplaying sort of his party and his role in sort of the Brexit vote very, very post 2016. Especially at that point, that is the point where the Brexit zealots took over. At that point, that's when the ERG were heavily pressurizing Theresa May to go for like this incredibly hard Brexit. That the Brexit that Theresa May was selling was far too soft. It was, quote, not what people voted for. But there was never a type of Brexit that people voted for in 2016. He's massively over-egging himself there. Certainly in this part of the interview, he was not that politically important by this point, even with his Brexit party.
And then as the election approached, I remember talking to Chris Hope here on one of the podcasts, Joe Chop's podcast, and I had a big choice in that election. Do I go around the country, rubbish the deal, call Boris a liar, say vote for the Brexit Party, knowing that in this election, been different before, 15 was different. 15, I hurt the Labour vote much more with UKIP. But knowing in this election, I'd hurt the Conservative vote, and at least we get a form of Brexit, or risk the Liberal Democrats winning from Esher and Walton down to the Scilly Isles, a whole slew of seats in Parliament, maybe a second referendum. And so after a bit of...
Oh no, a second referendum? You mean like Nigel Farage and a lot of the Brexiteers used to say that they wanted pre-2016 and then strangely didn't want another referendum after 2016, after they just managed to win by 2%. Kind of strange. Kind of very, very strange.
Behind the scenes negotiation that went on between Number 10 and myself through intermediaries, decided to basically throw him a towel, say, right, I'm not going to criticize this deal anymore. I'll say it could be better, but it's the best we've got. And so I feel to some extent that I did contribute to Boris Johnson becoming Prime Minister. I did help him get the majority that he got. I did so on a level of trust. I mean, not complete and utter trust, but a level of trust. And that at every level, I feel let down by this government. I think the country's been let down. I think Brexit's been let down. I can now see the establishment lining up to blame every single woe of our nation on Brexit. And I worry that they'll do their best to overturn the legacy that I fought for over a quarter of a century. Do you know what? I am angry.
So what are you going to do about it?
Well, I can do what I am.
Yeah, I want to try and finish this off, but essentially they're certainly over-egging himself. I think Boris Johnson would have done just as well without him. Maybe they wouldn't have done well in a couple of seats. Maybe they would have lost one or two, but I still think Boris Johnson would have won that majority. It still would have been a big majority that he would have won, but the Liberal Democrats wouldn't have swept the seats as he would claim. That's not certainly what the polls were saying at the time, but there you go. So what is Nigel Farage going to want to do? So we'll try and finish off quick. Actually, tell you what, let's speed this up because he's been speaking very, very slowly, but we'll speed this up.
Doing, which is through media, through working with you guys at The Telegraph, through doing what I do on GB News, for feeding the 3.3 million people I have on social media. I joined Getter this week, which could be a new avenue to perhaps not being shadow banned all the time by Twitter. I will do my best to influence arguments. I will do my best to be ahead of arguments. I'll do my best to educate, to inform, to get people to pressurise their members of parliament, whether they're Labour or Conservative. And I go on doing all those things. And I'll go on doing them with the same level of passion and energy that I've always had. Your next question, of course, which I'm not that stupid. The next question is, will I get involved in politics again? I mean, I did it for a heck of a long time. If there was a level playing field, then I probably would. But there isn't. It just isn't. Number one, my name's Nigel Farage. I'm never going to get an even break from the press, but that I can live with. The funding rules are just ludicrous. I could not raise big money without the donors then being charged inheritance tax on their donations. I mean, can you believe it? I mean, talk about rigged system.
But why would you want your party funded by big donors? And you're talking about outside donors as well. That's quite worrying. So once again, I'm glad that we've got those systems in place to stop you from doing that, Nigel. But yeah, that's quite worrying that you are like, yeah, I want outside, of the UK donors, big money donors to give big money to me. That doesn't very much sound like a man of the people that you seem to want to portray yourself as. It's quite revealing there.
First past the post system, utterly corrupted postal voting list. 2014, UKIP won a national election.
By the way, that is something that let's finish off here because I've had enough of Farage as well. Let's wrap this up. So the interesting point here that he's bringing up is if we did bring in PR, and people like myself, we do want to bring in PR as well, we would have to absolutely see off people like Nigel Farage. That is true. That is 100% true. We would have to see off people like Nigel Farage. Now, in many ways, Nigel getting in and his party acting like complete buffoons, like complete clowns, presenting actually having to present actual policy would damage them. Like the second they won any sort of big majority or got maybe coalition with like the Conservatives, they get absolutely wiped out in the next election because people would see them for what they are. That Nigel Farage is a complete charlatan. He styles himself as a man of the people, but he isn't in the least. He talks all the negatives about immigration. We just heard him lie about immigration. That the UK population, according to Nigel Farage, which we looked up quickly, isn't true. That 95 or is it 85% of UK population has been driven by immigration. I looked it up. Doesn't seem to be true. The only source that I could see supporting Farage was a website called Migration Watch, which is run by a very, very right-wing individual. Interesting. So let's not dismiss people like Farage. Now, he would also split the right-wing vote as well. That is true. But let's not dismiss people like Farage. If we do bring in PR, like proportional representation voting, And we do want to bring that in. It would be a massive sea change for our government and for British politics as a whole. We would have to, us on the left, would have to worry about Nigel Farage. And that means we have to start thinking about all sorts of different types of policy that we could bring in that would help counter this guy, that would help us see him off. Because all Nigel Farage would talk about is free markets, globalization, or, well, not globalization, but globalization, as you've heard him talk there. We'd have to see him off. That is shockingly true. And that's something I think a lot of people in PR don't tend to acknowledge, because obviously it's sort of a bad thing to bring up, but I think it is something worthy to actually bring up. And maybe we'll have to actually ever talk about that in a future video on this channel. But it is just gone 9:30, and I've had enough of. We've done 2 hours of Farage. Well, almost 2 hours and a half of Nigel Farage. To be honest, I don't want to continue going on about Farage for much longer. Let's say I've had enough of him. I know you've had enough of him as well. But as always, thank you very much for watching, guys. Please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button on your way out. Thank you very much to the people who do help support the channel. And by the way, to the people who are joined the Pony Club, you see they've got little badges next to their names. Those badges are showing that they're part of the Pony Club, and that they have that you've got a free super chat a month you can use, guys. Remember that you've got a free super chat you can use. Most of you don't actually use it, so use them. So yeah, thank you very much to everyone again who helps us join the channel. Like I say, a link to join the Pony Club is down below. There is a link to my one-off donation link, Buy Me Coffee. You'd like to buy me coffee. There's also a Patreon link down below as well, where you also get access to the membership videos as well that we've released. So as always, thank you very much, guys, for joining us. We'll see you on Saturday morning live again for the Good Morning Walk, where I'm sure we'll be talking about Liz Truss's energy policy. That is coming out tomorrow. We'll probably be doing videos about it as well, because we've got a video coming out tomorrow about Jacob Rees-Mogg being the business and energy minister, about how he's going to do an absolutely terrible job. And I'm sure we'll be talking about other members of the Truss cabinet as well in the near future as well. So with that said, as always, thank you very much for watching. Please remember, as we said, to hit that like and share button on your way out. Please remember to leave a comment afterwards as well. It always helps. And of course, we'll see you all next time.